In systems like Auckland, where really there hasn't been an observed eruption. I know that Maori were here, but there's no really good record of the last eruption or any of the other eruptions in Auckland. So we have to take as a starting point, something has happened. And this slide illustrates that. It happened in principle. We can speculate on how such things happen, how volcanoes happen, even when we don't see it. And that, of course, is the basis of a lot of geology, that we don't see things happening, but we infer what has happened from deposits, even though in many cases we don't fully understand it. So this is the sort of thing that we start working with. This is Mora Korea out in the harbour. It's one of the most nicely developed of Auckland's volcanoes. It illustrates all of the major kinds of activity that we think will happen in Auckland. It started as an explosive eruption and produced this. There's a crater rim, quite a broad volcano made up of what the geological terms are called tuff. I'll show you a picture of the sort of eruption that may produce this in the future. As the eruption proceeded, it became what we call dry. The early parts of activity involved interaction of magma with water. But then the eruption became dry. We had fire fountaining, which you may well have seen on television every time Hawaii erupts. That produced a scoria cone. And then finally, at the end of the eruption sequence, there were lava flows. Not all of Auckland's volcanoes show all three types of activity, but this one does particularly nicely. Mostly what we are faced with working with is deposits like these. And again, you may all have seen such deposits and thought nothing of it, or if you've got a garden on them, then they make quite nice soil. But the scientific approach is to pull apart all those different layers in various ways and try and understand what actually formed. And that gives us the picture of what sort of eruption occurred. Now, from this kind of examination of many different outcrops, and roads, and people's gardens, and building sites, and what have you, we have the following picture of styles of activity. The first style is on the right here. This is the kind of explosive activity that builds broad craters such as Panmure Basin or Oroki Basin or Lake Rupuki. The deposits are often fine-grained. The phenomenon when the eruption's in progress is quite violent, it's quite explosive. And you see here an example from Iceland of an explosive eruption column that's building a cone of debris around here. This is, for convenience, referred to as a wet eruption, but if you want the scientific term, phreatomagmatic activity. Phreato meaning steam, magmatic meaning magma, so it's a steam-boosted eruption. In Auckland and in other parts of the world, as eruptions progress, often the water that is driving these phreatomagmatic eruptions is denied access to magma, and so the eruption becomes dry. We have something such as a fire fountain illustrated on the left there. And this builds up scoria cones. So the scoria cones in Auckland have built up with this sort of activity. And then in the middle there, the sort of phenomenon we always associate with volcanoes is the production of lava flows. And so Auckland volcanoes, some of them, not all of them, have done that. So we built up this picture of styles of activity, and we're quite confident about that. But the next question is, where does the magma come from? It comes from the mantle, but how deep does it originate, and how quickly will it get to the surface? And the answer to this one, I'm afraid, is a little bit scary. This is a slide that's got a lot of detail on, but the point I want to make is that we can study in great detail deposits of any volcano, and in fact we've done this for as many as we can in Auckland, and individual centres have their own sorts of history, but they produce a picture which is consistent. I'm not going to go into details of it, but if we look at the chemistry of the deposits of an Auckland volcano, systematically from bottom to top, there is considerable change in the composition of the magma from the beginning to the composition to the end. And we can use that change to say something about the processes which produce the magma and, importantly, the depths. And the consensus which is emerging is that magma in Auckland originates quite deep, not in the middle of the earth, but at about 100 or perhaps 80 to 100 kilometres. And it is generated by a very small amount of melting of the rocks that are down there. And once you have a certain amount of magma generated, it rises buoyantly and carries with it that chemical signature. An important implication of that chemical signature, apart from the fact that it tells us the depth, is it tells us that the magmas must rise extremely quickly, because there's no suggestion that they encountered, melted, incorporated anything on the way up. And I'll come back to that point later. Now, confirmation of this depth comes nicely from seismic studies. This is studies of earthquake waves as they pass through the earth. This was a study done at Victoria University, and they presented this at a meeting I was at, and they presented after me, and I said, the magmas are coming from 80 to 100 kilometres down, and they said, hey, our results show that too. Did you know? And I said, no, I didn't. But here we are, Auckland. It's a more general slide, but beneath Auckland, there's this funny effect on earthquake waves that is interpreted as the presence of melt beneath Auckland at about 80 to 100 kilometres. So that's okay. The magmas come from deep down. They rise quickly to the surface. We know what happens. The next question is, how often does this occur? And here's something where we're really not yet well equipped to answer the questions. The last eruption was about 600 years ago, and we've got these are frequency of eruptions through time, and you can see they occur over quite a long period of time. Also, they occur quite unevenly. So the best thing to say about timing is actually we don't have a very good handle on the timing of past eruptions in Auckland at the moment, but we do have a way of addressing this. And this picture shows some shots from a maar drilling program. Now, a maar is a swamp or a lake that fills a crater. Once those craters are formed, they are receptacles for anything that comes in, anything carried through the air. And the core that you see here is just a part of one core, and these cores contain essentially peat, and within layers of peat there are layers of ash, and those ashes act like a record, like a tape recorder almost, of every volcanic eruption that's impacted Auckland in the last, well, we've gone back 60,000 years. And some of these are from Auckland, and they're providing information about the Auckland volcanic field, but you'd be surprised how many eruptions from Taranaki, from Rotary, from Taupo, from Tongariro are recorded in this period. So that's what we're doing about time, and I don't yet have a good answer about how often these things erupt. The other thing we're doing, well, we're not doing, the other thing that this research inputs to is monitoring. And Auckland is very well serviced by volcanic seismic monitoring network, essentially earthquake recorders dispersed around the city that are designed to pick up earthquake precursors as magma starts to rise. And that's run by the GeoNet program, and it's been developed by University of Auckland, other universities, and GNS over time. Now, the big problem with recording earthquakes in Auckland is cultural noise, and here, for example, is a little bit of a volcanic record, and each of these peaks, each of these lines records midday, and so between each vertical line is the seismic record, the vibration record of Auckland, between one midday and the next midday. I just want to briefly look at this part of the record, which blows up one day. So here's midnight, early morning. Aucklanders get up, go to work and so on, and there's immediately a lot of cultural noise. And funnily enough, there are two dips in this pattern of daily cultural noise. One is about 10 o'clock in the morning, and the other is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. These seem to record morning and afternoon tea. So I guess people are quiet at morning and afternoon tea, but lunch they take more seriously. Anyway, what are we doing about cultural noise?